In this video, I'll be exploring the psychology behind one of history's most twisted and depraved minds. Marquis de Sade, born in 1740, was a French nobleman, writer, and philosopher known for his shocking and controversial works. He was imprisoned for much of his life because of his extreme ideas and scandalous lifestyle. His erotic writings and actions inspired the term sadism, meaning pleasure from pain. His writings, like Justine and the 120 Days of Sodom, focus on themes of power, cruelty, and sex. At the time, and even now, these works stand as some of the most challenging and controversial works ever written. For instance, his most controversial novel, The 120 Days of Sodom, describes the activities of four wealthy, libertine Frenchmen. These four men spent 4 months in an isolated castle seeking ultimate sexual gratification through committing violent, unspeakable acts towards their victims. It's hard to imagine anyone reading that novel without feeling deeply shaken for at least a few days afterwards. The Oedipal complex is a concept developed by Sigmund Freud. He believes that the child usually develops an attachment to the parent of the opposite sex, which is accompanied by envious and aggressive feelings towards the parent of the same sex. So for a boy, he will be attached to the mother and have aggressive feelings towards his father. However, in adolescence, it is theorized that Sade actually developed a negative Oedipal complex, showing fierce resentment towards his cold, neglectful mother and a deep yet frustrated love for his father. When his father eventually rejected him, it caused further sorrow. For instance, when Sade's father saw that he was being spoiled by his female relatives, he decided that his son needed male guidance. Instead of providing that himself, he sent him to live with his uncle. His hatred for his mother is believed to be expressed in his writings through his explicit dislike of procreation. Sade even argues that child abandonment, like what he went through, and infanticide are acceptable. He also supports sodomy, lesbianism, and abortion as methods to control the population. Psychologists believe that these unusual development stages led to a personality that refused to accept the reality of life. Sade clung to the grandiose delusions of childhood to avoid complete mental breakdown. This need to keep up his inflated sense of self is often linked to what is called regressive neurosis. In psychoanalysis, the reality principle is the mind's ability to understand the real world and act according to it. Freud described this as the process of delaying instant pleasure in favor of long-term satisfaction. This principle is part of growing up and accepting that one can't always get what they want right away. In psychoanalytic theory, regression is a defense mechanism. It happens when the ego returns to an earlier childlike stage of psychosexual development. This response occurs due to a major external problem or internal conflict. Carl Jung described it as an attempt to regain a sense of childhood innocence and security. Regression can stop the reality principle from developing. Regression can express itself in many ways. Sade believed that the world existed to satisfy his whims. He felt he had the right to do whatever he pleases, including extreme actions like whipping women or organizing orgies. no matter how much society condemned him. He even admitted to this in his writings. He said that the entire universe had to flatter his whims and that he had the right to satisfy them at will. For instance, on Easter Sunday in 1768, Sartre deliberately sought out a woman to abuse. He encountered Rose Keller, an unemployed weaver who had just attended Mass. When Keller asked him for money, he promised her some in exchange for cleaning his house. Once there, he stripped her clothes off, tied her to the bed, and whipped her until she bled. He made cuts on her skin and dripped hot wax into them. When she cried and said she feared dying before completing her Easter duties, Sartre mockingly offered to hear her confession, then continued to abuse her. Keller eventually escaped and alerted the police. This narcissism reinforced itself through what is called narcissistic cement. Each of Sartre's crimes strengthened his sense of power over others, providing him with an illusory sense of control. Sartre felt above the law, similar to royalty. He clung to his idealized self, linked to his childhood rivalry with the Prince de Conde. He saw himself as close to the French crown, stating that he obeyed no one but the king. He needed to constantly reaffirm this illusion to maintain his sense of self. Sartre's sexual practices focused on the region, similar to a small child's early pleasure centers. His writing often showed disdain for female genitals, favoring male ones. In the 120 Days of Sodom, he stated that a boy's bottom was far more precious to him than a female's one. Sartre's sadomasochistic acts were done publicly enough to provoke punishment. He needed to shock society to feel powerful and to reassure himself that he wasn't being ignored. We can see his love for sheer shock value in the following quote: "In the inebriation of pleasure, it is essential to utter powerful or dirty words, and blasphemous ones are particularly serviceable. One must spare nothing. One must adorn these words with the greatest possible luxury of expression. They must scandalize as forcefully as possible, for it is so sweet to scandalize. It is one of my secret delectations. Few moral pleasures better ignite my imagination." Sartre once said, in a very self-aware manner, "We monsters are necessary to nature also," and there is some truth to this. His influence may have reached 19th century figures like Stendhal, Baudelaire, and Dostoevsky, as well as philosophers like Stirner and Nietzsche. In the 20th century, he had a significant impact on thinkers like Foucault and Bataille. Foucault, the most cited scholar in the world, remarked, "Sartre is the one who actually liberated desire from subordination to the truth." Bataille, after reading his works, added, "The fact is that what this Sartre was trying to bring to the surface of the conscious mind was precisely the thing that revolted the mind. From the very first, he set before the consciousness things which it could not tolerate." So, as we can see, his writings did influence notable figures in history. But then again, there's a lot of real-life pain that he inflicted which cannot be ignored.